This show is brought to you by the PTSD 911 award-winning documentary. If you want your team to begin talking about wellness, this film needs to be included in your training curriculum. Order it today for your agency at ptsd911movie.com/toolkit or click on the link in the show notes. Welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. This is episode number 78. I'm your host, Conrad Weaver. Thanks for joining me today. My mission, as always, is to bring you content that inspires you to live a life of wellness. Because, as I often say, wellness is not optional. If you want to be at your best and serve your community at your best, you first have to take care of you. And I hope you're doing that. Now, if you're someone who wears the uniform or loves someone who does, this episode is especially for you. We're getting real, we're getting raw, and we're diving deep into the mental health challenges that so many of you first responders face, but sometimes rarely talk about. Today, my guest is someone who exemplifies both courage and vulnerability. Rachael Belcher is a veteran paramedic in Baltimore County, Maryland, with more than 25 years in emergency services. Rachael opens up about what it was like when years of trauma caught up to her, how she lost herself in the weight of the work, and how she found the strength to say, "I need help." If you're listening and you've ever felt the weight of the job pull you down, you're not alone. This episode will not only speak to your heart, it will offer real tools, hope, and next steps. So grab your coffee or maybe take this one on a quiet walk. But either way, call a friend to join you and get ready for an honest, deeply moving conversation with Rachael Belcher. Hey, before we dive in, if you're a regular listener, I'd be incredibly grateful if you'd leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Your feedback means the world to me, and it helps others discover the show. If you think someone in your circle would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. That's all I ask, and I'm so grateful. Now, let's get into my conversation with Rachael Belcher. Well, Rachael, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the program today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell me a little, so tell me a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Okay. So my name is Rachael Belcher. I am a paramedic. I've actually been a first responder or public servant, emergency services. I've been involved for 27 years. I've been getting paid for it for about 25. In the early 2000s, actually August of 2001, I started as a dispatcher. So I was down actually in training when 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And I stayed at dispatch for 3 years. I was a 911 operator and a police dispatcher. And then in 2004, I went to the career fire department in Baltimore County. And I've been there ever since as a paramedic. I started as an EMT, quickly became a paramedic. I did 30 days in Biloxi, Mississippi, post-Hurricane Katrina, which was a really interesting and eye-opening experience.
Yeah, so Baltimore County, that's a pretty busy place for someone in your profession.
Yes, it's extremely busy. There's challenges abound. We do have a lovely community, and those of us in the field, we become first responders because we have servant hearts and we really just are drawn to helping. But it is very busy and it takes a massive toll on your psyche, your body, pretty much every aspect of your life.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, first of all, thank you for your service and for serving the community and the way that you are. Over the course of your years, you said you were in the call center or in training on 9/11. What was that like? I mean, were you just hearing all kinds of stuff going on?
It was chaotic. So because I was still in training, prior to 9/11, September 11th was 911 day. They had a cake that said, "Happy 911 Day." And once we kind of got word of what was happening, they wheeled in the old, remember in school when you had a substitute, the TV on the cart,
Yeah.
and allowed us to kind of watch as things unfolded.
Mm.
And then soon after that, we actually went up to the floor because we weren't fully trained yet, so we couldn't take calls, but we were placed with a call taker and were kind of able to listen to the calls coming in. It was chaotic. People were scared. The system was completely overloaded. Some people weren't able to actually get through. It went to, very rarely it'll go to like a please wait, until someone's available, and that was happening. So it was a very eye-opening introduction
Sure.
to the
Kind of
job.
jumping right into the fire, right? And
Yes.
yeah, although Baltimore wasn't directly impacted, it was in the vicinity of Washington D.C. So a lot of people
Right.
who work in D.C. live in Baltimore and that whole area and the whole region here in Frederick. I wasn't here at the time; I was in Colorado, but I know people who lived in Frederick said, yeah, all the roads were jammed. It was just total chaos here, and we're 50 miles from downtown Washington.
Right. And I think it was, the fear and not knowing of where would be affected next, because we were seeing, obviously New York and DC and Pennsylvania, and, those places aren't that far from here. So I think there was a concern of what's next.
Right. So what prompted you to go from the call center onto the back of an ambulance and run calls?
Partially, it was because I don't have a personality that can be tethered to a desk and sit in a basement. I also really didn't like the not knowing of the call center, where you take the call, you have this kind of intimate connection with the caller, you're helping them through some really difficult times, and then you just never get to know the outcome or what happened to them. And that is equally as distressing sometimes as knowing the
Sure.
outcome.
Sure.
So I just, I did not think that I would be able to do a full career in that situation. I'm really glad I had the experience. I have so much respect for dispatchers and call takers. They are amazing. But I wanted to do more, honestly. I wanted to be on the streets, hands-on, kind of straight in the action.
It's interesting with all the 911 dispatchers that I've talked to and spent time with, there's a lot of control they have, but then there's a lot of things they can't control. They can control who's dispatching, who's going and who's arriving and all that stuff. And they can close streets and they can do all the things that they can do to help the scene, but they can't be there in person helping the scene, helping the situation. So
It can be
like
a very helpless feeling.
yeah, I'm sure. So what in your early career as a EMT paramedic, what were some of those things that maybe started to crop up in your life that was like, this job is really impacting me in a not so healthy way?
So, just a very brief backstory. My father is a retired state trooper. So, and he was actually one of the first EMTs in the state of Maryland when they developed the program when it was CRT back in the 70s. Before I went into the job, he kind of prepped me with, you really, you have to keep an eye on things. This stuff will catch up on you. And, as a young person, I started dispatch when I was 21. I heard him and, I internalized it, but I really didn't truly understand the depth of what it meant at that time. Fairly soon after I got in, I started to get those like high acuity, quite traumatic calls. And what's interesting is we're prepared for the job. We're prepared to keep ourselves safe. We're prepared to keep our crews safe. We're prepared to assess the scene. We're prepared to be able to treat patients in life or death situations. But one thing that isn't discussed or talked about is how to keep ourselves psychologically safe, or how to notice warning signs in ourselves, notice warning signs in each other, how to kind of mitigate or prevent the accumulation of this like psychologically injurious buildup that happens. So, these things are happening, and it was kind of noticed. Like "Oh, you had a bad call. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine." And that's kind of the typical,
Yeah.
"We're fine. Let's move on to the next one. Let's get a pizza. Let's move on to the next one," no matter how horrific the incident was, just because that is the way we did it. And it actually wasn't until I had been in for about 15 years and I had a series of my personal trigger call or least favorite is suicide calls. Um, and I had a bunch of those back to back. And I realized that what was happening is when I had one of those calls, I wasn't just being affected by that call. I wasn't just being affected by what I was seeing, what I was smelling, what I was hearing of that call. That then kind of started this Rolodex in my head of then remembering every other single call that I had that was similar. So I wasn't just feeling the emotions and, the sensations of that call. It was that call plus all of the other ones that were similar. And I was noticing this pattern of, okay, this isn't sustainable. So I would say at around 18 years, that's how long it took me to say, this is a problem.
Wow.
So a couple years, way more accumulation of those type of calls and other, the worst are children calls, suicide calls for me, things that are just nobody, wants to see. But and I said, this is I'm not okay. I wasn't thinking straight. I was still. What's interesting is, and I think this is the same thing for most of us, we still perform our job duties at top notch. It's muscle memory. We're treating our patients with the same high quality of care. We're not making medication dose errors. We're not.
Well, let me ask you this: what in those 18 years that you said you didn't start doing anything? What were some of your, without you don't have to go into all the dirty details, but what were some of the things that you did to cope with those all those memories and all those experiences that you had?
Not much, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I knew that it was there. And I would do some I would go get a massage every now and then. I love being in nature. I would go and walk. It certainly wasn't as much as I should have been doing, but I did not have anything that I would hold myself to do on a regular basis, which is something that I now know is necessary. But I started to notice that my home life was being seriously affected. I was coming home. I wasn't wanting to participate in my family. I am not an angry person by any means, but during this time, I found myself having a hair trigger, getting angry, having a very short patience, and not wanting to do anything social, not wanting to be a part of social groups, or I wasn't calling or texting my friends. I wasn't maintaining communication with my family outside of my household. And at work, even though I was performing my job, I was isolating myself from the shift. I was going in another room. I would take my dinner and eat it elsewhere. And it was mainly because I think as responders, we don't want to put our yucky feelings on other people. So I was like, I'm not myself. I feel like crap. And I don't want anybody else to, because I think all of us are like sponges. We kind of very empathetic. We soak up other people's emotions quite easily. And I didn't want to expose anybody to that. And I didn't really know what was going on. So I just decided to not be around people.
Do you think other people that you worked with were going through something similar and you just all didn't really talk about it?
That is highly possible. And I know now in hindsight, after talking to some of the people that I was around, that was the case. And I think that it's more prevalent than we have any idea. I think that a lot of us and it doesn't even have to be work related. It could be you're going through a divorce, your child is sick, you have a child with special needs, you're having financial difficulties. And so it's, yes, it's the job, but it's in the article, it says it's the job and it's the job and, what's going on in your life as well.
And sometimes what's going on in your life can be related to what's going on at work.
It most certainly
they
can.
all kind of mesh together and one affects the other.
Right. And I think it's interesting how I was actually listening to a podcast called Hidden Brain last night, and she talked about becoming a mother. Before she was a mother, she had she had an idea of what it was like, but until she became a mother, you can't fully understand what that means. And it's really the same thing with being a first responder. Once you are there and once you have that knowledge and experience, you can never go back to being what you were as a civilian. And you honestly can't even understand, you can't even compare the two things because, to compare, you'd have to say, I was good before, I was good after, but it's a completely different identity. And I don't, it's very hard for non-first responders to relate to us. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's certainly possible, but we don't want to share a lot of the things with them that we experience because we don't want to traumatize them. And it's hard to kind of talk openly and honestly and vulnerably to people and give them enough information to allow them to fully understand. And I think that's why a lot of these marital issues kind of happen within our community, because it's hard to convey that information. It's hard to get non-first responders to understand our experience.
So in the course of your experience, when you started noticing this in your life, what was that moment that you said, you know what, I might need to get some help. I might need to talk to someone. What triggered that? What gave you the courage to make that choice?
So I equate it to lighting a match and it's burned all the way up until it's right at your fingers. And you have the choice to either allow it to continue to burn your fingers or to drop it, which would be, taking the step to do something. I had 3 back-to-back suicide calls, again, kind of similar to back in, years prior. And I remember everyone coming up to me and saying, "Are you okay?" And I had, I call it that at that time I was a gray crayon. I was just no facial expression, nothing in my head, just complete numbness. And I knew that I was never suicidal to the point where I wanted to take my life or had a plan to take my life, but I did not care if I lived anymore, if that makes sense. And I knew that was a huge problem because I have a family, I have 2 children, and I wanted to live and thrive more than anything. So I knew that was the time that I needed to do something. So I checked myself into a 30-day inpatient first responder centric facility for mental health treatment. And I feel that I didn't have an option. There was no way to continue on. There would be no way to complete my career without taking that step. I think had I been better prepared earlier in my career, that probably could have been prevented, which is why kind of my mission now is to have some of that stuff instilled, so to try to prevent some of these inpatient stays, because for some people it's absolutely necessary, but there are ways that we could prevent things from getting to that crisis point.
What was the reaction from the people around you that you worked with when you said, "Hey, I'm going to be gone for 30 days"? What was their response to that?
Honestly, it was mostly good for you. That's awesome. Because people knew that I was not me. I was at the beginning of my career and for most of it, "Hey guys," not like toxically optimistic, but I was always the one that was like, "Oh yeah, today sucked, but we get to hang out with each other," but we get to, laugh and joke, and people knew that I just was not me. And they were like, good for you. Like, we missed the old Rachel. And so did I. I hated the person that I was. It was not me. So I didn't hear any negative feedback at all, which was really nice and encouraging.
What was one of the first things you learned about yourself when you took that 30 days and you started to do that work? What was one of the things you learned about you?
Sure. So how important your childhood is, and your childhood and your just life experiences in general prior to coming into the fire department, how much they play into your ability to, I guess, be resilient, or what you have learned as far as your emotional intelligence, as far as your like resiliency techniques, your self-care. Can you recognize things in yourself? And I couldn't. There was times where I would have chronic pain for 3 years in a row and not do anything about it, because it's like, oh, just shove that down, ignore it. Oh, you're sad? Ignore it. It's fine. Just pretend you're okay. So I learned that, the repression of how you're feeling, emotions, and physical, it does not just go away. And emotional repression will lead to physical symptoms, physical illness, even up to cancer, even up to Parkinson's, even up to, what's the one? I'm having a brain cramp. The one that named after a baseball player, Lou Gehrig.
Oh yeah.
Even up to Lou Gehrig's disease. Like, this stuff it is huge.
Sure.
Repressing things is extremely detrimental to our body and our mind. So that was probably the most important takeaway for me, and really opened my eyes to holding this stuff back and in is not a sign of strength. It's actually, for me, and I saw in myself, it was more a sign of cowardice. Of I was holding this in because I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be, I was afraid what people would think, or nobody else has a story like mine, so I'm just going to keep it to myself because it's embarrassing. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. Like, I felt so brave and courageous, and like, oh, okay, I can say this stuff. And once I started telling my story, people were like, oh my goodness, I felt the same way. Our stories aren't exactly the same, but we're all doing this, like shoving down our feelings to try and, I don't know. I really don't know why we do it, but it's not helpful.
I'm curious, you said how, pushing this stuff down, makes us more susceptible to cancer and other things. And I wonder, cancer is a huge deal with law enforcement and with, firefighters. And obviously, firefighters and EMTs and medics are exposed to a lot of crazy chemicals, and house fires and accidents and things like that. But I wonder if that suppression also plays a major role in the reason cancer is a problem in the first responder community.
I'm not a scientist. I don't have a bunch of letters after my name, but my hypothesis would be absolutely that it contributes in some way. And I think it probably contributes equally as heavily as the environmental or the occupational toxins that, we're exposed to. And this is what's interesting. We have, gear to protect us from the thermal heat.
Right.
We have SCBA to prevent our lungs from the smoke and the heat. We have gear washers to prevent ourselves, or to, help prevent the exposure to the chemicals that cause cancer. We have climate vent systems, which keep us from breathing in the exhaust fumes. All these are preventative measures to, help us not be exposed to as many scientifically proven occupational hazards. Yet, interestingly, there is little to no training, education, tools, resources to try to begin to prevent some of these psychological injuries that we all incur throughout the career. Now, all of us are not going to get PTSD. You know, that PTSD is a big word, right? Some of us do get PTSD. It's a real thing. And then you have PTS, which is post-traumatic stress. That's, we cannot prevent the exposure to trauma and stress. But what we can try to prevent is the accumulation, which then leads to the accumulation of those psychological injuries, stress, trauma, grief, vicarious stress, all that stuff. We can prevent the things that happen from that accumulation. And it's, at least departmentally, in my department, it's not being currently done.
What are some of the tools? You mentioned a bunch of tools that you have, the SCBA, all the things that you use to help. What are some of the tools that you use now that you didn't use before to prevent some of these stressors and psychological injuries that you described?
Sure. So there's a variety of things that are available for people to use. This aspect is going to be different for every single person. So for me, I got out of my 30-day stay. I then found an EMDR therapist, and I completed almost 2 years of EMDR therapy before I felt like I was not good to go. Everything's a work in progress, but I feel 98.5% better than I did before I went in. But I think what's important for people to understand is that if you do get to that crisis point, it takes a long time to get to a point of healing, which is why it's so important to prevent it and take action as soon as you start noticing signs. Because if you wait to get to crisis, it takes a long time. So I did EMDR. I learned, the breathing techniques, how important actual self-care is, how important it is to have an identity and something outside of work, how important community is, how important talking about things is, how important connection. And all of these things it sounds so obvious, but all of these are things that we as first responders, as helpers, as we are the warrior archetype where everyone comes before we do. And we will run ourselves into the absolute ground before we look in the mirror and say, oh, I can't, if my passion is taking care of others, how can I take care of others when I'm not giving that same kindness to myself? So it's just kind of realizing that the call is coming from within, and you need to answer that call and take ownership. Because if we wait for the department to do it for us, we need to take ownership of that for ourselves.
I often relate this to, if you look at someone that plays for the Baltimore the Ravens, okay, their elite football team, the elite players, as a team, they provide the resources to help their people do the things that they need to do to be successful as a team. But individually, they come with this package. They've been working on themselves probably since middle school. Because the best middle school players make it to high school football. The best high school football players make it to the college teams. Only the best college team players make it to the NFL. So they've been working on this for a long time, working on their physique, working on their, speed, working on all the things. How many medics go into this business? They haven't worked on anything on themselves aside from their skills as a medic.
I haven't done a survey or a study, but I am going to assume that the percentage is very, very, very low.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, honestly, that is across the board for many first responders.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's ignorance. And when I say ignorance, I just simply mean not knowing how important it is.
Sure.
And unless you came from a family with an incredibly emotionally intelligent parents, or you had a mentor that kind of stressed the importance of that, you know, baseball children, their parents are saying, hey, you got to do this, you got to do this.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to play for the major leagues, this is really important. But for first responders, until recently, I'm not even sure anybody knew the importance
Sure.
of being, psychologically healthy, knowing yourself, knowing how to express emotions. And even today, you can see some of our leaders still haven't grasped that concept. And I'm not throwing shade by saying that. I'm saying it because if you don't know not only that it's important, but why it's important and how malignant it is from the top down to not embrace this concept, it spreads like cancer. This, you know what you signed up for, suck it up, dust yourself off, get back out there. We got calls to run. And I think that's a lot of the problems that we're having in like changing this culture, changing you hear this word stigma thrown around an awful lot. And I do think it's changing, at least in my experiences with, talking to people. And I know different generations kind of address things in different ways. And I also think it's important to kind of understand that different generations are going to feel differently about things and feel differently about how they are going to address and talk about these topics.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you said early on that your father was involved as a first responder, in law enforcement, and he told you early on, you're going to have some stuff. So imagine someone not coming from, you had a little bit of a head start there with thinking about these things, but many other people come to this profession without that.
With nothing.
With
right?
nothing. And if the academy, if you don't learn these things, in the academy, when are you going to learn them?
Right. And it truly does go beyond resiliency classes.
Mm-hmm.
Resiliency classes are important.
So what do they teach in the resiliency classes? What's involved?
So it talks about, grounding techniques, box breathing. And it mostly has to do, so they say resiliency is the ability to bounce back. Okay. What am I bouncing back to? Was I in a sucky place before this event happened and I'm bouncing back to a sucky place? And there's a lot of highlight and stress on PTSD and not enough stress on that stress and, challenges in life can be a huge catalyst for growth and propulsion to be, a better, more rounded, more resilient person. There's a lot of talk of, you can get past this. You don't just have to survive, you can thrive. We need to know what that pathway looks like. How do we do it? How long does it take? And the answer is it's different for every single person. And the first step is being willing to take that step to say, I need some help. And then with the understanding that this is not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of commitment. It's going to take dedication. It's going to take discipline, but it's a million times worth it. And the end result might be you finishing your career with dignity. Another result might be you saying, you know what? The healthiest thing for me to do right now is not to finish this career because my life and this career don't align anymore.
Mhm.
And both of those options are are great. I don't want to lessen folks that take the step to get help and come out the other side and say, not for me anymore, because that's just as dignified as deciding to finish out the career. And I just think more emphasis needs to be on the growth aspect. There are lists of different modalities, complementary modalities, clinical setting, therapeutic modalities, medical things that we can do, holistic things that we can do. And um, I'm not going to use up all our time discussing all those things. But there's just so many options, and we don't know what they are.
Mhm. It seems like it's really a whole mindset shift for someone, that you have to be willing to make some pretty important changes in your life to be able to thrive in the business that you are in. That's hard. You know, when I went to the doctor last year, and the doctor said, I need you to go to a cardiologist. I was like, okay, that's not good. So, I went to the cardiologist, and then so you have to look at, okay, what am I eating on a daily basis? I had to make some choices. If I continue down this path, there's a good chance, I'm going to end up in one of your stretchers, you know, heading to the hospital. But so I had to make some life choices. And I think it's the same with first responders, that you have to make a choice. Do I continue to struggle with this and just push it down and hopefully hope for the best? Or do I make a change and actually make a difference?
Right. And that is so true. It's not easy. And anytime we are self-reflecting, and maybe either we ourselves recognize something in ourselves that uh, is not helpful, even detrimental, it's not an easy pill to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add the layer of a spouse telling you these things. You're drinking too much. You're angry. You're yelling at the kids. You're
No,
not
I'm
involved
not.
in the,
I'm
you're,
fine.
right. I'm fine. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
You're bugging me. But it's it takes a lot of strength. And what's interesting is the type of people that enter this job are very action oriented.
Mm-hmm.
They're very goal oriented. I have to do this thing. This is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it now. But when it comes to ourselves, somehow that has been separated out and like put into a lockbox, maybe because the importance of it hasn't been highlighted as much as other things. And I'm hoping that that idea can change. But yeah, using substances to kind of numb emotions, and just the cascade of just that alone, which is a high prevalence in responders,
Mm-hmm.
how that affects your health, how that affects your family, your relationships, how it could come to affect your job, our work family. If they do notice a problem, we have the tendency to help them kind of enable that by, well, I don't want you to get in trouble. I'm going to help cover it up. And that's coming from a place of love.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming from a place of care. But what it actually is, just kind of enabling someone who is at a place where they need somebody to say, listen, man, I love you. And this is why I'm noticing these things. And I think you should get some help. It's a hard conversation to
Yeah,
have.
for sure. Why is it so hard for leaders, perhaps, who see their people struggling? Why is it so hard for them to step in and say, "Hey, you know, Rachel, I think you need to go to a 30-day treatment center, or I think you might need to go see a therapist, or you might need to go into some program." Why is it hard for leadership to do that in the first responder culture?
I think it has a few layers. I think that they don't think that someone's personal struggles, in a sense, are their problem.
Hmm.
They think it's more of like an HR problem, right? This isn't an operational problem. This is an HR problem. Couldn't be farther from the truth. This is an operational problem. Your people are your most valuable asset.
Absolutely.
All the time. Relationships have to be established before there's a problem. So I think the leaders who take the time to get to know their people, to have an open door policy, to lead with empathy, not saying being permissive of, we still have a job to do, but I think that you can lead with empathy, lead with, I care about you. And so that if something like that does happen, the member is approachable. Hey man, come and talk to me for just a second. We're having this conversation because I care about you. I've noticed these things, and I want to talk to you about it. Whereas if you're a leader who has not taken the time to get to know your people, you don't know anything about their life, you don't know that their child was just diagnosed with cancer, you don't know that their wife is about to leave them, you don't know that their car just got repoed. If you don't know that your person, one of your crew, is going through anything like this, and then on a call, they might say something out of place, or they forget to check something on the rig, and then you're going to write them up, or discipline them in some way, or talk to them about this infraction, and they just absolutely go through the roof with all of that anger and frustration or whatever built up from what's happening in their personal life. And you're thinking that, oh, this is because you wrote them up because they, had a hole in their shirt or something. So it's quite detrimental to not know your people, to not have a relationship. It's so important so that when you do notice something, or when someone has a disciplinary issue, to sit them down and say, listen, this isn't like you. Before I write this paperwork up to discipline you, what's going on? Like, let's talk. Is there something, like, do you need some help? And I just think that is the rarity, at least in my experience. I hope someone can tell me that that's not true globally, but that's been my experience. Now, I do want to say I have a wonderful captain who very much so has a appreciation. So when he listens to this, I don't want him to think that's about him, because it's not. But in general, I've had a lot of experiences, specifically when we get a bit higher up in the ranks, where we're no longer people. We're kind of cogs in a machine. And it's really hard to approach someone when they don't trust you. If you're approaching someone to tell them you're noticing an issue and they don't trust you, that is not going to be received.
Sure. Yeah. And that's, again, part of that organizational stress that is so prevalent. I know the FOP has said that their top two stressors, in law enforcement is organizational. It has actually both stressors are related to that. Shift work, that kind of thing is all. If you can't trust your leadership because they don't have your back, that's going to be a tough conversation, and it's going to be a tough sell to hear what they have to say to you when they're putting you into some disciplinary action. So
very much so.
Yeah. So early on, you talked about how you described yourself. You were like a gray crayon. When you came through your 30-day treatment and in your journey since then, has the color come back?
Oh my! I'm a whole 64 back, baby, with the sharpener. I want to stress that when I was that gray crayon, I did not think I would ever be any different. I was in the mindset and truly believed to my core that this job had given me brain damage. I remember saying that. I feel like I have brain damage. Like, I don't even remember who I was. And I thought that feeling that way was a natural progression of the job, and that I had now just reached a point where I have to just exist and put my head down and charge through and just make it to the end. It kind of felt like I was in a bear trap.
Hmm.
Like,
You were stuck.
I'm only a couple years from retirement. I'm stuck. I have the option to just stay stuck here, or I can gnaw my leg off and be free. I'm gonna be minus a leg. Like, I'm gonna have to make a sacrifice, but at least I'll be free. So I decided I needed to make that sacrifice. I gnawed out of the trap and went and checked myself in, and did 2 years of gut wrenching work. Without doing that, I don't even know if I'd be here today, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't easy, and it took a really long time. And I'm not, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I think, everything is a work in progress, but at least now I'm like, okay, now I know whatever comes up, I can get through it because I got through something really, really, really difficult. So it gives me that strength and knowledge that I'm capable of doing really hard things, and that the outcome puts me in a better position than I was before.
That's a really important thing to learn about yourself, that you're able to do these hard things. And I've had some of those experiences over the last few years of having to do hard things and coming out the other end knowing that, oh wow, I was able to do that. So what do you do now today on a regular basis to help you continue to be those 64 colors in the box?
Community and like open communication and dialogue is so important. And realizing that if I have an issue with someone or something happened that hurt my feelings, like, I don't have to keep that in, and it doesn't have to be a fight. Like, I now know how to approach and have these conversations with like love and empathy, and also the knowledge that I can't control other people's reactions, feeling, emotions, actions, that like the only thing I can control, and I guess what I'm speaking on right now, is boundaries, right? Deciding what my boundaries are, and then feeling comfortable maintaining those with communication, with what I'll accept and with what I won't accept. So that was a really important thing for me, because what I realized in that 30-day stay was I had zero boundaries and I felt walked all over. But what I had done is I had treated those people, or I had taught those people how to treat me, that they could do whatever they wanted to me. And I wasn't going to say anything. I do things like read, write. I just, any free time, I'm learning things, I'm writing things. That article that I wrote in Gems was extremely cathartic. Just kind of putting words to a way that I had felt for so long that I had never heard expressed in words. It just felt so healing to say, like, I was not making this stuff up. I was not crazy. This was real. And now I can actually put it into words. And that was a huge indication that, like, okay, I'm doing good. I'm moving in the right direction. Just taking the time to have an identity outside of work, I think, has been the most important things for me. And then just connecting with my children, connecting with my friends, and just trying to be a whole person.
I worry about some people, especially in those departments that in this area here in Maryland, we have a lot of volunteer fire stations, and a lot of the guys and gals that volunteer are also full-time at other places. And I'm concerned about that, because they're connecting with their own people and now going back to the firehouse back home and hanging out and going on calls and not getting away from it.
Yeah, that is something that happens quite often. And I think like the mind shift, because we are such a dedicated people.
Sure.
We're so attached to, for the fire department, it's duty, honor, and tradition.
Hmm.
We want to serve our community. We want to be loyal to that oath that we took. If we hear someone in distress, we want to be the one that goes to help them. And I think being able to take off that fire coat or take off that stethoscope and say, I am allowed to not turn on the radio and listen to the calls coming out. I am allowed to not respond to for volunteers, obviously, if you're at work, you have to. I am allowed to rest. I am allowed to sleep. I'm allowed to put my phone down and connect with my family. It's just, it really just, most of this has to come from within. This knowledge that sometimes when it comes to like sleeping, nutrition, physical activity, these are things that only we can control. And if we're on our phone at night until 2:00 in the morning, scrolling reels, guilty sometimes, like who do we have to blame when we're not at work? So it's like taking that ownership of, I'm going to do this for myself because it's that important.
The other thing that I know a lot of first responders do is, Call of Duty and other gaming systems that, and I remember talking to, actually it was Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He was talking about this in the military, how, over in Iraq and Afghanistan, the guys were, went back to home base and they were up all night playing Call of Duty, and it's like, they're not getting any sleep. They're out running missions during the day, then doing missions at night on their computers,
Right.
It's like, there comes a time when you have to learn to shut it all off, to really take care of yourself.
Our minds are a hamster in a wheel. It's so hard to shut it off. And it is an active process that we have to, it's just like learning a different language. The first time you try to learn a different language, you're going to feel frustrated. You're not going to know what you're doing. You're going to wonder if you can ever do it. It's going to feel uncomfortable. So like learning how to shut our brains off when appropriate is a learned like action that we have to take steps toward every day. So like, if you know that you go and play Call of Duty for 5 hours every night and you have the desire to not do that, to engage in other ways in your life, you just have to decide and say, okay, well, tonight I'm only going to play it for 4 hours, or tonight I'm only going to play it for 2, and it might have to be a slow progression. I'm not saying go cold turkey, and I'm not saying playing Call of Duty is a bad thing, but just like with anything, if you're doing it in excess, if you're drinking in excess, if you're smoking in excess, if you're playing games even if you're going to the gym in excess, think and kind of reflect, am I doing this to escape from my life? Or am I doing this because I really enjoy doing this and, I get something out of it? Or am I doing it to escape? If you're doing it to escape, then you might need to reflect on the reasons why. And you might need to reflect on if you think that you want to change that behavior.
Yeah. So talk to that medic, that EMT who's listening to this. Maybe they're, at the station with their earbuds in between calls and they're listening to this and they're like, man, I'm a great Crayon. What should they do?
Okay. The first thing they should do is tell someone they trust, a friend, a family member, a coworker, but it has to be someone that you've built trust with and that you feel comfortable being honest with. If you don't have someone like that, hopefully your department has a peer support team and you could find someone there that that you trust. If you are suicidal, dial 988, talk to someone. Your life is important. Your presence is important. You are needed. You are necessary. You are loved. And there is help available. But talking to someone and telling someone is the very first step, because holding that stuff in is not helping. And you might not need to go to an inpatient facility. You might just need to talk to someone. You might just need a kind ear to listen to your story, to listen to what you're going through. You might need a referral to a clinician if you feel that's appropriate for you. You might need to go find a friend to go for a walk in nature with, or go for a bike ride, or go fishing, or go whatever, something that you like to do. But connection is the most important thing when you're a gray crayon, because, and it's not going to feel natural, because when I was feeling like that, I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to tell anyone the truth of what was going on, because I knew that once I told someone, some type of action would need to happen. And I had just gotten so comfortable in this state of misery. I didn't want it to change, not because I didn't want to feel better, but because I didn't have the emotional or physical energy to do anything. Talk to someone, and talk to someone regularly, and then let them help you. Because if you're a gray crayon right now, your brain isn't working like it should. We get into this area of brain fog where we're not thinking straight. We're not making rational choices. We're not making rational decisions. You may or may not be using substances. You may or may not be doing other risky behaviors. But hopefully this trusted person can kind of help you navigate what you need next.
What are some resources that have worked for you, have helped you along the way? Articles, books, podcasts, other things like that have helped you to get to where you are today?
So I listen to podcasts all the time. I love yours. Thank you for doing it.
Sure.
My other favorite one is Hidden Brain. It's on NPR. And How to Be a Better Human. I really like that one too.
That sounds pretty basic, right? It's just like I think that's something everyone should listen to, probably.
Yes, exactly. And it's cool because they discuss topics that seem benign, but they aren't. Kind of like what we're talking about. Like, yeah, you should sleep more. Okay, okay. But when you look at it, it's so important. It's so important to our overall health. Getting up and moving your body. Okay. It's so important. Two other things I wanted to mention as far as physical health goes to the listeners is you probably have to go to a yearly doctor's appointment. And there are a few things that are not included in that doctor's appointment that you should be requesting. One of those things is a vitamin and mineral panel, a hormone panel, because a lot of responders have hormone disruptions and abnormalities. And another screening is called a cardiac calcium screening. It's a CT that looks for hidden plaque in your heart, and it will show those. It will show that before you'd have any signs or symptoms, because a lot of us in this community have that because of the stress, because of the chronic stress cycle, all of the things that are expressed in our bodies when we're chronically stressed, and the fact that we are rarely getting into that rest and relax state. Gabor Mate is a doctor who I adore. He has a book called The Myth of Normal that was really interesting. I would say The Body Keeps Score by Vanderkolk, but that might be a boring read for people, but maybe you can find some YouTubes about it. It's about how, our repressed emotions and experiences come out one way or another. And it's usually in a not a great way if we continue to repress. It just kind of, I want to stress how important it is to learn about yourself, learn how your experiences prior to coming into the service may or may not have affected you and what you bring forward. I say, you come into the academy, everybody comes in with a bucket. Some people's buckets are huge, some are tiny, some are already full, some are empty. And that state, it is what is going to kind of predict your risk factors for how you move forward in the job. What's going to affect you might not affect me. And it has to be understood that we're all very different, but we all need the same things, which are connection, to feel valued, wanted, to feel belonging. It's right on the Maslow's triangle. Like, if you notice somebody at your station or your shift who's an outcast, befriend that person. Talk. Like, we shouldn't be bullying or outcasting people anymore. It's just not. This is 2025.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your candor and your story and sharing the things that you did. You mentioned that you wrote an article for GEMS. Where can people find that if it's available?
I did. So it's GEMS, and it's called Grief on the Front Line, Managing Our Hidden Wounds. And you should probably be able to find it easily on a Google search. And my name is Rachael Belcher with an AEL. So I believe it'll pop up even if you just type in my name.
Okay. We'll make sure we put a link
in the pipeline.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can access that. So
thank you.
Is there anything else that you want to share as we wrap up here? Anything that you want to, any final comments that you want to share?
I really just want to say that all of the things that you may have heard about asking for help being weak, you knowing what you signed up for, that if you're affected by the job, that it means you're not cut out for it. Those things are not true. You're important. Your experience is important. We need people to do this job because it's an integral part of society, but we also shouldn't suffer massive psychological and physical detriment from it. So there are definitely things that we can do to improve that, and just really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you for your contributions, and thank you for your contributions to your community as well. Thanks so much for sticking around and listening to the show. I really appreciate it. And please remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.